Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today in Yirtz Hashem. We will complete Daled Amid Aleph. We'll do Daled Amid Beis, and a piece of Hey Amid Aleph as well. Again, I am working very hard to rejoin the Dirshu schedule after what we missed on Pesach and one day after Pesach. So we pick up today in Siman Kuf Chav Ches. We're on Daled Amid Aleph. We are near the end of Sif Yud, so we pick up two lines from the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch on Daled Amid Aleph, right by the Ois Katan Lamed Zayin for the Mishnah Berurah. Now, so here in Sif Yud, the Mechaber was describing to us what goes on by Duchening, by Birchas Kohanim. The Kohanim have gone up to the Duchen. We said that the Kohanim must be oikrim mimekaimam. They have to leave their spot in the Beis HaKnesses. They have to leave their seat in shul to go up to the Duchen during the bracha of Ritzei. So when the Shatz starts Ritzei, the Kohanim leave their place and they start to go up to the Duchen. They don't have to arrive at the Duchen. They have to arrive there by the end of the bracha of Maidim, by the end of Atayv Shimcha Ulechanoah Lahaidos. They don't have to arrive during the bracha of Ritzei, but they have to leave their place during the bracha of Ritzei. Now they've gone up to the Duchen. When they go up to the Duchen, they stand facing the Aron Kodesh with their back to the Tzibur, with the back to the people. When the Shleach Tzibur, according to our minig, the Shleach Tzibur says, HaTorah Shimcha L'chana L'haidos, then silently to himself, he says, Elokeinu v'Elokeinu v'Seinu Barucheinu B'Bracha M'Shuleshes B'Torah Haksuva Yidei Moshe Avdecha Ha'amura Mipi Aharon Uvanov. That he says quietly. Then he calls out loud, Kohanim. That's if there are at least two Kohanim available. If there's only one Kohen, he doesn't call out Kohanim. But if there are at least two Kohanim available, he calls out Kohanim. Everybody says, Am Kedoshecha Ka'amur. And now here's what we're up to in the Mechaber, two lines to the bottom near the end of the line. The Mechaber says that at that point, Umachazirim Penehem Klape Ha'am. Now the Kohanim now they turn around to face the people. Ve'imhu echad einoi kairalai elohume atzmai machzir panav. If there's only one kain available, if you don't have two, then the Shleach Tzibur does not call out kayanim elohume atzmai machzir panav. In that case, the kain will turn around on his own, but the Shleach Tzibur will not call out kayanim. Okay. Now, we're going to, as we go weiter in the Mechaber, we're going to see precisely when the Kohanim turn around. From the Lashon of the Mechaber over here in Siv Yud, it sounds like they turn around when the Shliach Tzibur calls out Kohanim. But we're going to see that that's not the case. That's what it sounds like right now, right? Because the Mechaber said, if you go back near the beginning of Siv Yud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom, the Mechaber said, "Va'oz imheim shnayim kaira lehem hashleach tzibur kohanim," and then he says what we just read, "Umachzirim pneim klapeam," and then they turn around to face the people. But we're going to see it's not exactly when the shleach tzibur calls out kohanim that they turn around, but let's take it as it comes. So right now, let's go to the Mishnah Berurah over here on Daled Amid Aleph. Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Zayin says the Chavetz Chaim, "Umachzirim pneihem." At that point, they have to turn around to face the tzibur. This much we know right away. We're going to discuss, again, precisely when the Kohanim turn around to face the people. But we do see that the Kohanim have to turn around to face the tzibur when they actually perform Birchas Kohanim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, how do we know this? The Alfina Gemara, because the Gemara learns this out. Gemara and Saita Lamed Ches Amid Aleph. Birchas Kohanim tzarich lihiyos panim keneged panim. That Birchas Kohanim has to be done panim keneged panim. The Kohanim, their face has to be facing the faces of the tzibur, and the faces of the tzibur have to be facing the faces of the Kohanim. However, the Mishnah Berurah says it's a little bit difficult to understand precisely what the Mishnah Berurah means here. I'm going to translate it and explain it the way I understand what he's saying. He says, the Kohanim do not necessarily have to be facing the Shliach Tzibur. Okay, let's play this out in our heads. Generally speaking, in our shuls, the Aron Kodesh is on the Mizrach. The Teva, which is the word that we use for the Amud that the Chazan stands by, is in front of the Aron Kodesh. So the Shliach Tzibur is also on the Mizrach. The Tzibur is behind the Shliach Tzibur, and they're all facing to the Mizrach. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, you should know, the Kohanim do not necessarily have to be facing the Shliach Tzibur, which means that according to this opinion that the Mishnah Berurah is citing now, the Kohanim do not actually have to be facing the face of the Shliach Tzibur and the faces of the Tzibur, because we assume that the Tzibur is facing in the same direction as the Shliach Tzibur. So again, in our typical shuls, the Aron Kodesh is on the Mizrach Wand, on the eastern wall. The Shliach Tzibur is facing east. He's facing the Aron Kodesh. The Tzibur that's standing behind the Shliach Tzibur, behind the Amid, is also facing east. Now, in that scenario, so the Kohanim would be standing in front of the Aron Kodesh. When they perform Birchas Kohanim, their backs will be to the Aron Kodesh, their faces will be facing the Tzibur. So here we have an ideal scenario. The Kohanim, their back is to the Aron Kodesh, their faces are facing the Tzibur, and this is mamish panim neged panim. It's the Kohanim are facing the Tzibur is facing the Kohanim. Now says the Mishnah Berurah, lav dafka. You don't, panim neged panim doesn't necessarily mean that the Kohanim have to be facing the Tzibur and the Tzibur have to be facing the Kohanim. And to illustrate this, the Mishnah Berurah gives us a different setup. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Kohanim don't actually have to be facing the Shliach Tzibur, and the Shliach Tzibur and the Tzibur facing the Kohanim. Ella, let's say we have a strange scenario. Let's say the Aron HaKodesh is on the northern wall of the Beis HaKnesses. So let's imagine a Beis HaKnesses where the Tzibur is davening facing Mizrach, but the Aron HaKodesh is on the northern wall, which would mean that the Aron HaKodesh is on the left wall of the Beis HaKnesses. The front wall of the Beis HaKnesses is the Mizrach, and everybody's davening facing the Mizrach, and the Amud is also in front of the shul facing the Mizrach. But for whatever strange reason, the Aron HaKodesh is not on the Mizrach. The Aron HaKodesh is on the left wall. It's on the north. Okay, what do you do now? Where should the Kohanim go? So says the Mishnah Berurah, again, even if for some strange reason the Aron HaKodesh is on the left wall, on the northern wall, and the Amud is on the east, facing east. In that scenario, according to this opinion, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Kohanim should go up to the Duchen on the northern wall. They should go up to the Aron Kodesh, which is on the northern wall. Upeneihem ladarim klapeham. And when they'll do Birchas Kohanim, they will turn around to face the Tzibur, which means they're standing with their backs to the north, with their faces to the south. But the Tzibur is standing facing the east. So this is not quite panim neged panim. It is the Kohanim facing the Tzibur. The Kohanim are facing the Tzibur. The Tzibur is arrayed in front of the Kohanim. The only thing is, the Kohanim are facing south and the Tzibur are facing east. Says the Mishnah Berurah that according to this opinion that he's citing now, HaKohanim oinim l'ftei ha'hekel batzafain, the Kohanim will stand on the north with their backs to the north, upneim l'darim, with their faces to the south, klape ham, facing the Am and the Tzibur. And he brings this down from the Magen Avraham b'shem Knesses HaGdolah. So again, the Mishnah Berurah started off over here. The Mechaber says, umachzirin pneihem. The Mechaber said that when the Kohanim go up, they're standing facing the Aron Kodesh. Before they begin to perform Birchas Kohanim, they have to turn around to face the Tzibur. How do we know that? Because the Gemara Insight on Daf Lamed Ches learns out, she Birchas Kohanim tzarech liyos panim keneged panim. Now, panim keneged panim literally means facing each other. Says the Mishnah Berurah that the Magen Avraham in the name of the Knesses HaGdolah says, lav dafka, lav dafka. They don't necessarily have to be facing each other. It's just that the Kohanim have to be facing the Tzibur. The Tzibur has to be arrayed in front of the Kohanim. So in this scenario, the Aron HaKodesh is on the north. The Kohanim will go to the north. They'll turn around facing south. So the Tzibur is in front of them. The only thing is, the Amid is facing the east. And since the Amid is facing the east, the Tzibur is also facing the east. So it's not literally Panim Keneged Panim, because the Tzibur is not facing the Kohanim. They're facing east. But they're arrayed in front of the Kohanim, and that's okay. That's the first opinion brought down here. But, says the Mishnah Berurah v'yeshayimrim, but there are those that say, Shetov yoser she'ha-Kohanim yamdu b'mizrach. In this scenario, it would be better that the Kohanim should go up to the Mizrach Vant. They should not stand by the Aron HaKodesh. They should go up to the Mizrach wall. Af al pi she'ha-heichal hu l'tzad acher. Even though the Aron HaKodesh is on the Tzafan. The Aron HaKodesh is on the northern wall, but they're going to go up to the Mizrach wall. V'ha'am yamdu negdam, panim neged panim. And in this scenario, now they'll mamish be facing each other. The Tzibur is standing facing east. The Kohanim are standing on the eastern wall facing west. So it's mamish panim neged panim. They're mamish facing each other. He brings this down from the Pri Chadash in the name of the Pri Megadim. Okay, next halacha. Shnei Kohanim asoinim zeh ezeh. If you have two Kohanim who nebach v'avonisenu arabim, if you have two Kohanim who hate each other, v'afilu nadru hanozeh mizeh, even if they hate each other to the extent that they actually took nidarim upon themselves, prohibiting themselves to derive any benefit from the other. So you understand, you have two Kohanim who somehow hate each other so much that each one of them made a neder. I'm making a neder. I'm not going to derive any benefit from Yankel HaKohen. And Yankel said, I'm not going to derive any benefit from Aaron HaKohen over there. That's how much they hate each other. Mutarin lalois biyachad. They're allowed to do them together. And in a scenario, I guess this was done sometimes, in a scenario where they duchened twice during the day, where they duchened once by Shachris and one by Musaf, these Kohanim cannot say to each other, you know what, I'm not going up to the duchen with you. I'll tell you what, you duchen by Shachris, I'll duchen by Musaf. Or vice versa. No, you can't do that. Because either one of them has the right to say, get out of here. I'm going to duchen by both. I'm not willing to give up one of the duchenings. Aval, Kayin Shat Tzibur Sainamaisai. Nebuch, you have a Kayin that the Tzibur hates. So I guess you have a Kayin that, for some reason, the Tzibur has a real problem with this Kayin. If you have, unfortunately, it's a terrible thing. Aval Kayin Shat Tzibur Sainamaisai. If you have a Kayin that the Tzibur has a real problem with, Ayhu Saine Es HaTzibur, or you have a Kayin who hates the Tzibur, Sakana hu lakayin im yisakapav. It is a sakana for the kayin to duchen. This is based on a zayar. There's a very scary zayar that says that there was a kayin who hated the tzibur, and he went up to duchen, and I think the lashon of the zayar is that he didn't finish duchening before he was nasa gal shel atzamos. He turned into a pile of bones. Doesn't sound very good. So it's a sakana for the kayin to duchen if he hates the tzibur or the tzibur hates him. V'lachein, and therefore says the Mishnah Berurah in such a scenario, Yeitzei mibeis hakneses kaidem ritzei, this kayin should leave the shul before ritzei, im eina yachal lachav his yitzray lahasar asinam yilibai, if he's unable to remove the hatred from his heart, he should leave. And as you can see, in the bracha we say that the Kohanim are commanded by the Borei Olam to bench the Bnei Yisrael ba'ahava, with love. And we'll read a Berhetiv about that later in this year. Okay, let's go weiter. Mishnah Berurah Katan Lamed Ches, the Mechaber said, Ve'im hu echad einoi kaireloi. If there's only one Kayin, then the Shliach Tzibur does not call out Kohanim. Ve'im hu echad, even if you have a case where there's only one adult Kayin, but there is another Kayin, a minor. There's a Katan who's a Kayin. So it's not going to be one Kayin alone going up to the Duchen. It's going to be one adult Kayin together with a minor Kayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, still you don't call out Kohanim. Gam kein einoi kairei Kohanim. He brings this down from the Mabit. According to our minig, remember, we said, the Mechaber said, that by duchening, the Chazan does not say, he skips that, and he just calls out, he says, and then he calls out Kohanim. The Ramah brought down the minig that the Shliach Tzibur does say Elokeinu v'Elokeinu, but he says it quietly until he gets up to the word Kohanim. Kohanim he calls out loud, and then he finishes it off silently. He says Am Kadeshecha Ka'amur, also quietly. Says the Mishnah Berurah, according to our minig, that's what we do. So Lefi minagenu sh'Shliach Tzibur Omer Elokeinu v'rak she'yomer Kohanim b'karam lo yichbas lan klal. So why shouldn't the Shliach Tzibur call out Kohanim even if there's only one Kohen? The Leka Hefsik, he's not saying anything additional. He's going to say Elokeinu v'Elokeinu anyway. So he's going to say Kohanim anyway. It's just a question if you should say it out loud or say it quietly. So according to our minig, says the Mishnah Berurah, why shouldn't he say it out loud? The Leka Hefsik, v'hu me'ena tefillah. High time a kasav El Yerabba shafil leka kain cotton rak kain echet klal. Therefore, the El Yerabba writes, even if there's only one kain, not one adult kain and one minor cotton, even if there's only one kain, nami amamar shliach tzibur b'karam kayanim. If the chazan calls out kayanim, ain't ligar by. There's no reason to protest against it. The ain shum hefsik bazeh, because it's not a hefsik and there's no loss. Well, what's the downside of saying kayanim out loud? Ice cotton lamites. The Mechaber said, if there's only one Kayin, then the Chazan doesn't call out Kayanim. Elahume atzmai maser panav. The Kayin on his own should turn around and start Birchas Kohanim without being called upon. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton lamites. Maser panav v'noise kapayim, and he'll do Birchas Kohanim umevarech gamkein mitchilo, and he'll make a bracha. The point that the Mishnah Berurah is making is the Mechaber said, if you have two Kohanim, then the Chazan calls out Kohanim. If you don't have two, if you only have one, then the Chazan doesn't call out Kohanim. Instead, the Kohen turns around by himself and starts Birchas Kohanim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, realize that even in such a scenario where there's only one Kohen and we're not going to call out Kohanim, still it's a full-fledged Birchas Kohanim, and the Kohen still makes a bracha. Even though we learned in Sif Beis, what did we learn in Sif Beis? In Sif Beis, we learned that if a Kayin is in the shul, when the Chazan calls out Kohanim, and he does not go up to the Duchen to do Birchas Kohanim, we said that he's over on a mitzvah saseh. Now, if you read that Mechaber, what does the Mechaber say? The Mechaber says it's from Beis Amud Aleph to Beis Amud Beis. In the last words of Beis Amud Aleph, the Mechaber says, Im haya, and then you turn to Beis Amud Beis, Im haya bebeis hakneses kishakaru Kohanim. If the Kohen was in the Beis HaKnesses when the Shliach Tzibur called out Kohanim, and he didn't go up, then he's over in an asay. Well, what if there's only one Kohen? If there's only one Kohen, then the Chazan doesn't call out Kohanim. Maybe if there's only one Kohen, then maybe if there's a Kohen, one Kohen in the Beis HaKnesses, and he doesn't go up, he's not over in an asay, right? Because again, the Mechaber said, if the Shliach Tzibur calls out Kohanim and he doesn't go up, he's over in an asay. But what if there's only one kohen? Then the chazan doesn't call out kohenim. So maybe in that case, a kohen who doesn't go up is not over in an assay. And if that's true, that if the kohen doesn't go up, he's not over in an assay, maybe that means that if he does go up, it's not really a mitzvah. It's not really a full-fledged Birchas Kohanim. He's not mechuyev to go up, so maybe even if he does go up, maybe he doesn't make a bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. He goes up, he does the his kapayim with the bracha. Even though a simple reading of Sif Beis would tell us that he's not even mechuyev to duchen, so maybe he shouldn't make a bracha. No, he does. And he brings this down from the Magen Avram b'shem Maharam Mintz. When we call shekei l'dasa ma'alach the taz of cotton gimel the mechuyev lalos b'HaTorah imhu echad afal b'shaloi kroi the mavarich. He says, of course, it's a kol shekei, it's a kavachimer, that according to the shita of the Maharach and the Taz, they hold that the kohen is mechuyev to go up, even if the shliach tzibur doesn't call out kohanim. So they say very clearly that even if there's one kohen, you're mechuyev to go up. So that, of course, you make a bracha. Okay, now we go to Sif Yod Aleph, last word in the Shulchan Aruch here on Daled Amud Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Kishem Machazirin Peneim Klape Ha'am. Now we're getting into the specifics. We said before, the Shliach Tzibur calls out Kohanim, and then the Kohanim turn around. Now we explain precisely when do they turn around. Says the Mechaber, Kishemachzirin Peneim Klape Ha'am, when they're turning around to face the Tzibur, Mivarchin asher kiddishanu b'kedushasei shel Aaron. That's when they make the bracha Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'kedushasei shel Aaron, who sanctified us with the sanctification of Aaron HaKohen, v'tzivanu, and who commanded us levarech es Amo Yisrael, to bench his nation, the Bnei Yisrael, be'ahava, with love. So what does the Mechaber say over here? When do they turn around? He says they turn around. The Shliach Tzibur calls out Kohanim. Now, a simple reading of this Mechaber, it sounds like the Shliach Tzibur calls out Kohanim. The Kohanim start to turn around while they make the bracha Asher Kiddishanu b'Kedushasei shel Aaron v'tzivanu levarich es Amo Yisrael ba'ahava. Let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bottom line on Daled Amud Aleph, Ois Katan Mem. Kishemachzirin Peneim. The Mechaber says, while they turn around. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'yesh be'harishaynim shesfira lahu. There are those Rishayim that hold the bracha zu mevarchin koidem shemachzirin Peneim. There are those Rishayim that say that they recite the full bracha before they turn around. So that would mean the Shliach Tzibur says, Kohanim, the Kohanim stand facing the Aron. They say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'kedushasei shel Aaron v'tzivanu levarich es Amo Yisrael ba'ahava, and then they turn around. That's the sheet of some Rishonim. But that's not what the Mechaber says. The Mechaber says, Kishem machzirin peneim klape ha'am. While they're turning around, they make the bracha. So we have the Mechaber that sounds like they turn around while they make the bracha. We have these other Rishonim that say that first they make the bracha and then they turn around. So which way is it? So says the Mishnah Berurah here on Daled Amud Beis, V'hamadaktikin, those that are careful, yotzid yedei shnehem. They make sure to be yotzid both shitas. What do? Dahainu shemaschilin habracha ba'od shepneim klape ha'heichel. They start saying the bracha while they're facing the Aron HaKodesh. Ubesoich habracha, and in the midst of making the bracha, machzirin peneim klape ha'am, they turn around facing the tzibur, the goimrin, and that's when they finish the bracha. So, if you take a look in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, Ice Cotton 58, footnote 58, he brings down over here, ubegeder besoich habracha. What does it mean that they turn around in middle of the bracha? Where? Ata? Elokeinu? Levarech? At what point did he turn around? Says the Dirshu footnote here, Kasra Birka Yosef HaKitzer Shulchan Aruch, She'ba'oid HaKohanim Klapei HaHeichal, while the Kohanim are facing the Aron HaKodesh, Yomru, they should say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Asher Kiddishanu B'Kedushasai Shel Aaron, Va'oz, and then at that point, Yehafchu Paneim, they should turn around, the Yomru V'Tzivanu Levarech Es Am Yisrael Ba'ava, they should turn around and then complete the bracha. I know that that's the minig by us in Yeshiva Staten Island. The Kohanim go up, they're facing the Aron, they start, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddishanu B'Kedushasai Shel Aaron. Then you hear a pause, and they turn around, and suddenly their voices get much louder, because now they're facing you. V'tzivanu livarech es Ama Yisrael ba'ava. Wow, I never got to do that before, because I'm not a kohen. Okay, so, again, the Mishnah Berurah said, V'amadaktikin yoitzin yidei shneim, ta'inu shem aschilin ha-bracha ba'id shepneim klapei ha-heichal. They begin the bracha while they're facing the Aron Kodesh, u'besoich ha-bracha, and in the midst of the bracha, and we just saw, before v'tzivanu, machzirin pneim klapei ha'am, they turn around facing the tzibur, the goimrin, and they complete the bracha. Ois katan mem aleph, mivarchin, hainu shekulam mivarchin. Each individual kohen has to make the bracha. Not one kohen should make the bracha and we might see the rest. Mishnah Berurah brings this down from the Magen Avram in the name of the Mabit. The Mabit writes that each individual kohen has to make the bracha. Not that one kohen should make the bracha till we might see the rest. And the Mabit says the reason for that is because if you would do it that way, the kohanim would be concentrating on the bracha of the one kohen who's making the bracha, and they would be concentrating on being yotze with the bracha and saying amen, and that would take their concentration off of Birchas Kohanim, and we don't want that. Says the Mechaber weiter, let's go to Sif Yud Beis, second line, Dalet Amud Beis. Says the Mechaber, now we've reached the point where the Kohanim are standing by the Druchen. They're standing up by the Aron Kodesh. Now their backs are to the Aron Kodesh. They're facing the Am, and we just discussed them making the bracha. Says the Mechaber here in Sif Yud Beis, Magbiim yedehem keneged kispaiseim. The Kohanim have to raise their arms level with their shoulders. So not down like this, not up like that. They have to raise their arms level with their shoulders. Magbiim yadayim keneged kispaiseim. Magbiim yad yemonis ktsas lamayla me'asmolis. And the right hand should be lifted a little bit. We're going to see it's a little bit. The right hand should be lifted a little bit above the left hand. Now, I'm doing this. That's not right. We're going to see that their hands are together, more or less. But they have to lift up their arms level with their shoulders. The right hand slightly above the left hand. Upoishtim yedehem, and they have to open up their hands, open up their fingers. First, open their hands, fingers outspread. V'cholkim etzba oiseihem, and they have to spread out their fingers in a specific way. Umechavdim, and they have to have intent. Lasois chamisha avirim, to make 5 ear spaces between their fingers. How so? Bein shtei etzba'is l'shtei etzba'is avir echad, between one set of 2 fingers and another set of 2 fingers, there's 1 ear space. Ubein etzba legudel, and between the finger and the thumb, there's another ear space. Ubein gudel legudel, between one thumb on one hand and the other thumb on the other hand, there's another ear space. And then again, on the other hand, there's 2 ear spaces. Ubein gudel legudel. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. Uparsim kapeim, and they have to open up their hands, kidei sheyeh toich kapeim keneged haaretz, so that the inside of the palm is facing downwards, keneged haaretz, v'achoyre yedeim, and the back of their hands, keneged hashamayim, is facing up. What did we just learn? Okay, so he said like this: the Kohanim have to raise their arms level with their shoulders. right hand slightly above the left hand. They have to open their hands and spread out their fingers to create 5 air spaces. How do we have 5 air spaces? The answer is like this. They open up their hands like this. How do you have 5 air spaces? Very simple. 1 air space. This is what the Mechaber described. He said, Bein shtei etzba'os lishtei etzba'os. Between one set of 2 fingers and another set of 2 fingers, you have 1 air space. Then bein ha'etzba and the agudel, between the finger and the thumb, you have another air space. So here's 1, 2. Now on the other hand, you also have 1, 2. That's 4. Where's the 5th? The 5th is between the 2 thumbs. Between the 2 thumbs, you have another airspace. Now, so it would come out that there would be, now, it's brought down that you're not supposed to do this. It's brought down that for somebody to do this, other than Birchas Kohanim, is to chas v'chalila bring a klala on himself. This is all mystical stuff that's way beyond our pay grade. But kedei lihislamed, in order to teach, you're allowed to do it. So I am doing this kedei lihislamed. So it would come out that what the Kohanim are doing is like this. They're holding up their arms level with their shoulders, right slightly elevated above the left, hands this way for the 5 air spaces, open palms downward, back of hands upward, but you're going to bring the hands together like this, not apart like that, because like the Mishnah Berurah is going to say, then you don't have 5 air spaces. The airspace between the 2 thumbs is not recognized as an airspace if they're like this. In order for it to be recognized as an airspace, they have to be together. Now, what exactly does together mean? Do they have to be touching? So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah over here, starting with Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Membes. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Magbiim Yedehem. The Kohanim lift up their hands. The Gamrin on Bracha, first of all, why do they have to pick up their hands? What is all of this about picking up their hands? Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Gamrin on Bracha Zu, we learn out this Bracha of Birchas Kohanim, Mimad Iksiv, from the pasuk that says, Vayisa Aharon es Yodav el ha'am, Vayavarachem. Aaron HaKohen lifted up his hands to the people, and he benched them. Harei Tzarech Nesias Yadayim. So here we have a pasuk mole. We have a clear pasuk that you need Nesias Yadayim. Ubahaikra haksiv Yodoi. Now, in that pasuk, it is pronounced Yodov. Vayisa Aharon es Yodov. Yodov is Lashon Rabim, his hands, plural, both hands. But it's written Yud Dalid Vav, which could be read Yodoi, which would be the singular one hand. Remez, from there we learn out that Tzarech Lahagbia Yoiser Yodoi Echad. Because the word Yud Dalid Vav has a dual meaning, on the one hand it's Yodov Lashon Rabim, which tells me he has to lift up both hands. But on the other hand, it's Yud Dalid Vav, which could be read Yodoi, which sounds like he lifts up one hand. We learn from that one hand has to be lifted higher than the other. Which one? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Umestamahi Hayamanis. The Mechaber said, if we're elevating one hand over the other, it means that we're going to elevate the right over the left. Ois Kat Mem Gimel, Yad Yamanis Ktsas. You lift up, this is a critical Mishnah Berurah. You lift up the right hand somewhat. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even though you're elevating the right hand somewhat above the left, Tzarech li Zoher, you have to take care, She'aniach Gudel Hayamin, that the right thumb should be positioned Al Gudel Hasmoil, on the left thumb. Shelo Yisparadu, they should not be separated. Why? Kedei Shelo Yishaver Hachaloin, so that the window, meaning the open space between the thumbs, should not be broken apart. The Ba'inon Chamisha Kavim, because we need 5 open spaces. Vim Yispardu, if the thumbs are separated, Eina Revach Shebeina Yamin Lusmail Neshav Klal Avir, then the open space between the right thumb and the left thumb does not constitute an open space. Now, I spoke to a very, very chashuv Kohen who duchened by us in Yeshiva Staten Island for decades in the presence of Rav Moshe Zechatzad V'Kodesh L'Vracha. And I asked him, I said, there's something bothering me here about the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah. And that is, nowhere does it say that the thumbs have to be touching each other. The Mishnah Berurah makes it clear, he says, uses the shloshon, that you have to make sure that the right thumb is me'al, is al gudel asmail, that it's on, al means above or on, the left thumb, shelo yispardu, they should not be separated. Why doesn't he just say noigim, that they should be touching? So, this Kayin told me that Rav Moshe said that no, the thumbs should not be touching. And he had rayas that the thumbs should not be touching. And he said that's why the Mishnah Berurah doesn't say noigim. He says that you should be careful that the gudel hayamin should be al gudel asmail. Al means above, because we just said that the right hand has to be elevated somewhat above the left hand. Says the Mishnah Berurah, yes, elevate them, but the right thumb should be above the left one, not like this. It should be like this. Shelo yispardu. They should not be separated. Said Rav Moshe, they should be close to each other. They should be close to each other. And the right one should be elevated right above the left one. So not touching. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'yesha kasvu, there are those that write, shebein mila lemila, between one word of Birchas Kohanim and the next, like between Yivarechecha and Hashem, v'choshkein min bracha lebracha, and certainly between v'yishmerecha and Yo'er. So the first bracha is Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, the second bracha is Yo'er Hashem panav elecha v'choneka. So between v'yishmerecha and Yo'er, rashoy lekarev oz hagudalim im hatzpais misham hayefus. If the kohen is tired, and if you think about an elderly kohen, you think this is easy? Right? This is not easy. Stay like that for the whole Birchas Kohanim, especially if you have a chazan who likes to listen to his own voice, right? Not so easy. So he says, if the kohen is tired, he has arthritis, it's hard for him to keep, so he could say, Yivarechecha, relax. Now the Shleit Tzibur says, Hashem, now, okay, Hashem, v'yishmerecha, v'yishmerecha. He could relax during those spaces. Okay, Oiskat Mem Daled. V'cholkim etzpaiseim, they should separate their fingers in the style that we just described. What is this based on? The Issa B'Tanchuma, because it says in the Medrash Tanchuma, Parshas Nasai, fascinating. Brings down the pasuk from Shir HaShirim, Mashgiach min hachaloinois. The Rabbeinu Shalom was watching over Klal Yisrael, Mashgiach min hachaloinois, from the windows. What does that mean? Mi bein etzpaiseim shel Kohanim, between the fingers of the Kohanim. Meitzitz min hacharokim, he's looking through the openings, b'shasha poshtim kapeim, during the time that the Kohanim are doing the siyas kapayim. Oiskan mem hey, u'mechavdim lasis chamisha, we need these 5 openings. Remez lazem imadiksiv ha-charokim. It doesn't say charokim, ha-charokim, with a hey. Hey charokim, 5 openings. Oiskat mem vav. Uparsim kapeim kidei, they spread out their hands so that the palm is down and the back of the hand is up. What he wants to say is, not the way people usually lift up their hands by davening. Usually when a person lifts up his hands in prayer by davening, he goes like this with his palms up. No, by Birchas Kohanim, you go like that. Okay, now we move on to Sif Yud Gimel in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, Maschilin HaKohanim loymar yivarechecha. Very interesting. The Kohanim went up to the Duchen, they made the bracha, they turned around, they have their hands outstretched. Now they start saying Birchas Kohanim. Says the Mechaber, how does Birchas Kohanim start? Maschilin HaKohanim loymar yivarechecha. The Kohanim say yivarechecha. Notice that he did not say that the Chazan calls out yivarechecha. He said that the Kohanim say Yivarechecha. So the Mishnah Berurah is going to say that the Mechaber held that the Shlech Tzibur does not have to say Yivarechecha. Why? Because the Kohanim they know that they're about to do Nesias Kapayim. They know that the first word of Nesias Kapayim is Yivarechecha. They could say Yivarechecha on their own. After that, now they need the Chazan to prompt them. But for Yivarechecha, they don't need the Chazan to prompt them. And we'll see that inside. But I wanted to explain that outside right away, because everyone's going to have that kasha. So now let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, Maschil and the Kohanim loimi Yivarechecha. The Kohanim start saying Yivarechecha. Hago. Says the Rama, V'yesh oimrim shagam milas Yivarechecha yakra oisoi shlech tzibur tchila. There are those that say that no, that the Chazan has to say Yivarechecha as well. V'chein noyagim b'chol medinos elu. And says the Rama, that's our minig in all of our regions. Continues the Mechaber. V'achakach makra oisam shlech tzibur mila b'mila. Certainly after Yivarechecha, the Chazan calls out one word at a time, and the Kohanim repeat word for word. And the Kohanim respond to each word that the Shlech Tzibur says, Ad sheyisaimu pasuk rishon, until you end the first pasuk, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, v'az ayim atzibur amen. And then the Tzibur responds with amen. V'chein achar pasuk sheni, so too after the second pasuk, v'chein achar pasuk shlishi, so too after the third pasuk. So what the Mechaber is describing is, according to the Mechaber, the Shlech Tzibur would not say Yivarechecha. The Kohanim would start Yivarechecha. Then the Chazan would say Hashem, and the Kohanim would say Hashem, v'yishmerecha, v'yishmerecha, and then the Tzibur says Amen. Then the Chazan starts again Ya'er. The Kohanim say Ya'er, so on and so forth. One pasuk at a time. Amen. After each pasuk, repeating word for word after the Chazan. The Ramah says that the Chazan has to say Yivarechecha as well. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Nun. No, Ois Cotton Mem Zayin. Maskilin HaKohanim. The Mechaber said the Kohanim start right away Yivarechecha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ubekayin Echad She'ein Koyin Loi. In the case where there's only one Koyin, in which case the Chazan did not say Koyanim, Kulei Alma Moedim de Makrina Le Yivarechecha, then even the Mechaber would agree that the Chazan has to call out Yivarechecha, and the Kohen would repeat Yivarechecha after the Chazan. Oizkat Memches, Loimar Yivarechecha. The Ramah said that our minig. No, I'm sorry. The Mechaber said that the Kohanim start with Yivarechecha, and here is where the Mishnah Berurah explains the Mechaber's thinking. Svirle, the Mechaber holds that the need for the Chazan to call out each word of Birchas Kohanim, Mila b'Mila, to the Kohanim, Hu levad miteva rishayna, applies to the rest of Birchas Kohanim with the exception of the first word Yivarechecha, the Bei Leka Lamite, because no Kohen is going to make a mistake on the word Yivarechecha. After the word Yivarechecha, now we have to do this style where the Shlech Tzibur calls out and the Kohanim repeat word for word. What is that based on? Why does it have to be that way? Why can't the Kohanim just go up to the Yomud and say Yivarechecha Hashem Yishmerecha? Why do we need the Chazan to say anything? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Midiksiv, this is based on the pasuk that says Amar Lohem. It says, the pasuk says you need to instruct the Kohanim. V'darshina, we learn out from there, Melamed shahachazan oimer lehem imru. The Chazan has to say to them, say. He says, Yivarechecha. He instructs the Kohen, say Yivarechecha. Hashem, say Hashem. That all comes from Amar lehem. Umikamakayim, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, hurak lemitzvah lechatchila ve'ena ma'akev. This is a mitzvah lechatchila, but it's not li'ikuva. You could do it without it. You still yotze Birchas Kohanim. V'raya lozeh, we have a raya to this. Milakamon sif chafhei. We're going to see later in sif chafhei. Beis hakneses shekula Kohanim. Where we're going to see the halacha if you have a shul that only has Kohanim. So in that case, the Chazan does not call out Yivarechecha. Ayin sham. The Kosovite, the Shlech Tzibur tzarich lahakris b'toch hasiddur. It's brought down that the Shlech Tzibur has to do this reading from inside the siddur. Loi bal peh, he should not do it by heart. Sif Yod Daled, bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch. Ein mevarchin ela b'lashon hakodesh. Birchas Kohanim has to be done in lashon hakodesh. U ba'amida, and it has to be done standing. The Kohanim have to stand. Ubenesias kapayim, and they have to have their hands outstretched. Ubekol rum, and they have to do it with a loud voice. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan. Ein mevarchin. The chol zehu min HaTorah. All of these requirements are midaraisa. These are not minhagim, they're not midarabbanans, they're dinim da'araisa. All of these things. The Rafinan calls them bekroy. They're all learned out from Sukkim. But Lashon HaKodesh, we know that Birchas Kohanim has to be done in Lashon HaKodesh. Tiksiv koi sevarechu. Because the pasuk says, koi sevarechu, so shall they bench the Bnei Yisrael. But Lashon Hazeh, with these words, Uva Amida, we know it has to be done standing, Diksiv, because it says in the pasuk, Lisharisai, to serve him, Ulevarich Bishmai, and to bench Klal Yisrael in his name. We learn out from there, Masherus Ba'amida, the same way the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash has to be done standing. Diksiv, like the pasuk says, La'amoid Lishares, to stand and do the Avodah, Hachinami Bracha. So too, Birchas Kohanim has to be done standing. Umenesias kapayim, we know it has to be done with outstretched hands, Tiksiv, because it says in the pasuk, Vayisa Aaron es yadav ela'am. Aaron lifted up his hands, Vayavarchem. Ubekol rum, and we know it has to be done with a loud voice, Tiksiv Amar Lohem. It says, say to them, Ka'adam ha'omer l'chaveroi, like a person talks to his friend, he doesn't whisper. The Gemara also learns out that tzarich liyos panim keneged panim, that it has to be done facing the tzibur. The kasser roiv apaiskiv kamat kulam tahani kulu liikuvahu, that all of these things are liikuva. These are all requirements. You're not yoytze Birchas Kohanim without these things. Va'afilu b'di'eved lo yotzu b'ifan acher. Even b'di'eved, you're not yoytze if you do it differently. If you have a kohen who cannot do this, let's say you have an elderly kohen who can't hold up his arms for that long, and we're going to see you can't even make supports. The Mishnah Berurah is going to give us a funny case. We have like suspenders coming from your hat, and it holds up the arms. No, the kohen has to be able to hold his arms up. So if you have a very elderly, weak kohen and he can't hold up his arms for duchening, he can't duchen. Because if he makes the bracha, he's making a bracha levatala. He's not yoytze. So you should go out. And I've seen this happen. Ice cut nun aleph uba amida. Birchas Kohanim has to be done standing. Hainu sheyah kohanim ba'amida. The kohanim have to be standing. Aval tzibur rashon leishev. The tzibur is really allowed to sit. Rak sheyu panim keneged panim. But they should be facing the kohanim. Va'minig shakol oimdin. But the minig is that side the kohanim, side the tzibur should be standing. V'chein mashba ba'meiri soita perik zayin u'megillah perik gimel. V'chein mashba be'eshkoil hilchas Birchas Kohanim the kosav shakol tzricha lama luftein be'ema u'bekovid roish, that everybody should be standing in front of the kohanim in ema, in dread, u'bekovid roish, with seriousness. The kohen shu chalosh ve'ena yachal lama ela al yidei smicha. A kohen who's weak, who can't stand without leaning on something, lo yisakapav, he shouldn't duchen, duki yeshiva, because leaning on something, to the extent that if you would pull that thing away, the person would fall down, that's akin to sitting, and you're not yoytze. Ois katan beis, umenesias kapayim, it has to be done with outstretched hands. Umisha yadav miratasin, somebody whose hands tremble for weakness, ve'ena yachal lahagbiya yadav, and he's not able to hold his hands up, eina noisakapav, he can't duchen. Va'afilu b'di'evid ma'akiv, va'afilu im yasa smuchin, even if you'll make supports, some kind of suspenders, shiyu kishurin ba'koiva sheberoishay, that will be suspended from the hat on his head. V'yachnis behem yodav, and he'll put his hands into these suspenders, shiyu nesui slamaila, so that his hands should be held up. Laimahani, doesn't work. Tehev al yidei smicha, because that's considered that your hands are up by the agent of a support. And we need that the kohen is lifting up his hands. Brings this down from the Noid of Yehuda and the Magen Giborim. V'huva b'shari tshuva. Im efshaloi lahagbiam l'shamuetes. But if the kohen is weak, but he's able to hold up his arms for a short time, so yagbia b'shas amirasa yivarechecha. He should hold up his arms while he says yivarechecha. V'yaniach b'shas hanigun beiteva l'teva, and put his arms down while everybody is singing. V'yachzer v'yagbia b'shas amiras hateva. Every time he has to say a word, he should lift up his hands. But when he's not saying a word, he can put his hands down. Kamasha Kasa, but Chuvas Ksav Sefer, Siman Yud Gimel Ayin Sham. Ice Cotton and Gimel, Ubekal Rum, it has to be done out loud. Hainu Bekal Beinani, says the Chavetz Chaim, it doesn't mean you have to scream. It means a middle voice, Lafuke Balachash, but not a whisper. Ubekal Makaim, however, Lepa'amim Tzarech Bekal Ramamish. Sometimes you really do need a loud voice. If there's a very big crowd in the shul, and you need everybody to be able to hear, if somebody only has a very soft voice or hoarse voice, you can only whisper. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he can't do it. And this person should go out before Ritzei. I just want to read one last thing before we close out the shir. Baruch Hashem, we accomplished a lot. Dalid Amid Beis. Be'er Heitev Ois Cotton Chaf. The Mechaber brought down that the lashon of the bracha is Asher Kedushanu B'Kedushasi Shal Aaron V'tzivanu Levarich Es Am Yisrael Ba'ahava, and commanded us to bench the Bnei Yisrael Ba'ahava, with love. It's not just V'tzivanu Levarich Es Am Yisrael. Commanded us to bench Klal Yisrael. No, he commanded us to bench Klal Yisrael ba'ava, with love. And I told you the Zayar that says that a kohen who doesn't love the tzibur, it's a sakana, nasa gal shel atzamos. Says the Be'er Heitev. Hatam she'omrim ba'ahava. The reason the nusach of the bracha is ba'ava, mishum de'issa b'Zayar, because it says in the Zayar, kol kohen de'rachem la'ama, any kohen who does not love the tzibur, oy ama loy racham in lei, or the tzibur does not love him, loy yisa kapav. He should not duchen. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Baruch Hashem. We're moving along nicely and steadily catching up. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael, the Rosh should send Yeshua's for first Parnassah should duchen to all those in need. We should be Zeichet Taka to all of the milos of Birchas Kohanim. Be well.